JonBenéт Ramsey, the little girl in Colorado, was murdered.
Beauty queen JonBenet. JonBenét's murder has frightened residents of Boulder.
This case had everything. It had a beautiful little girl murdered, found in her home, her parents as suspects, videotape of her in beauty pageants.
It touched every parent's heart. This was a child who was put to bed by her parents and never woke up. That's every parent's nightmare.
It was reported that shortly after you found your daughter's body, that you called the pilot of your plane to arrange a flight to Atlanta. Is that true?
I did. Police took the house over. We had nowhere to go. We wanted to go home.
They didn't want to talk to the police. They lawyered up right away.
At this point, they haven't interviewed the mother or father. Not surprisingly, they're still very grief-stricken. They have not been in any kind of condition to be interviewed.
There was no evidence of a break-in. There was no jimmying on the front door. There was no back door crashed in. There were 4 people in that house, and 1 died overnight. So everyone inside was a suspect.
I think the primary reason the focus so quickly turned to the Ramseys was you had that ransom note. Who would write a 3-page rambling ransom note other than someone trying to cover their tracks? Who was in the house?
When you realized that you two were the prime suspects, what did you think? What did you feel? What did you say?
Well, we were outraged. We were shocked. How could they think that? We were a normal family.
You just can't believe it. We're suffering from having lost our child. And then for someone to accuse you, it's just, you can't believe that that would happen.
The book says the parents always did it. And that became the conclusion. The tragedy of the police investigation was that it ended on December 26th.
You wanted to talk now?
They held everybody off with layers of lawyers and friends, and then the next thing the police knew, they were on CNN.
If anyone knows anything, please, please help us.
And as a mother, my heart went out to this couple. But my journalistic brain said to me, this isn't right. They should be talking to the police, not the public via cable television network.
John Ramsey says it's an interview he now regrets doing.
5 days after the murder, you did an interview on CNN. Why did you do that?
We did it reluctantly and at the insistence of some friends who could see that we were being painted as guilty.
What do you think happened to your sister? Yourself? What do you think? I think someone took her very quietly and put her down the basement. And then took her knife out. And then back. Maybe
I want to say something to the person or persons that took this baby from us.
Let me give the motive that is ascribed to you. Okay. You were downstairs, maybe she came down, she said, Mommy, I wet my bed. You said, again, JonBenet, and you either pushed her or you hit her, you were exhausted, you were furious. You did it.
You have a child. Would you get up in the middle of the night and slaughter your child? We're parents. We love our children.
These are the 2 major motives. Either you sexually molested her or you snapped because primarily
Let me tell you something. I'm a cancer survivor of stage 4 cancer. John has lost a child in an automobile accident. That completely changes your outlook. When you are standing on the brink of death with a terminal illness, your priorities suddenly line up in a row, and you know exactly what the important things are in life. And bedwetting is totally insignificant.
Did either of you for a moment suspect each other?
No, absolutely not for a microsecond.
The Ramseys insisted that an intruder had broken into their house.
Does it sound possible that a killer would sit for hours and hours in your house?
That house was so rambling. There were so many hiding places. Really? He could be hidden for a week.
I knelt next to her and I leaned down to her face. And John leaned down opposite me.
In her 1999 interview, Detective Arndt seemed to suggest to Elizabeth Vargas that in that moment, she was afraid of John Ramsey.
And we had a nonverbal exchange that I will never forget. And he asked if she was dead. And I said, yes, she's dead. And as we looked at each other, I remember, and I wore a shoulder holster, tucking my gun right next to me and consciously counting, I've got 18 bullets.
Why did you do that?
Because I didn't know if we'd all be alive when people showed up.
When Patsy Ramsey saw her daughter's body, she collapsed.
I knelt down over her and just laid my body on her body and my cheek against her cheek, and it was cold. And I just kept saying, no, no, you know, ask God. Ask God to raise her.
The kidnapping had just turned into a murder. Speculation about possible suspects begins immediately, and no one can be ruled out.
I know who killed JonBenéт. There's no doubt in my mind who killed JonBenét.
He says he woke to his mother's voice. "Oh my gosh, where's my baby?" Hall light cutting under the door. He didn't move. Says he thought a bad guy was in the house. So he played dead, stayed in bed. That's his story. Later, he comes downstairs. Claims he heard his father say, "Calm down, we need to call the police." He denies being there for the 911 call. Denies the words, "What did you find?" on the tail of that tape. Says he doesn't remember saying it. Maybe never said it at all. That's the line. However, the worst part isn't the words. It's the effect. On Dr. Phil in 2016, he smiles. He grins talking about the morning his sister was gone. He tells us it's how he codes a reflex, a shield. Not joy. Not mockery. Just nerves firing wrong. Defense mechanism, he insists, yet that leaves a gap. If he truly feared an intruder, why step out later, calm, compliant, without alarm? If he wasn't on the phone, why does the enhanced audio sound like a child in the room? If he didn't speak, why does the transcript catch a question? This isn't the worst of it. The worst is the vacuum where grief should be. Flat tone, short answers, no curiosity, no why or how. Maybe shock, maybe training, may both. What got them into the most trouble though, wasn't this, but that the timeline shakes when his version meets the tape. If he's right, the house lied. If the tape's right, he did. In their first statements in 1997, John and Patsy insisted Burke was asleep the whole night. They painted a picture of a boy untouched by the chaos, lying safely in his third-floor room. According to them, he didn't stir until well after the 911 call. They told investigators they never woke him, never brought him downstairs, never let him see what was happening. To hear them tell it, Burke knew nothing until later, when the police were already in the house. But not everyone agreed. Officer Rick French, one of the first through the door that morning, recalled something different. In his report, he noted Burke was awake, not just awake, but sitting at the kitchen table around 6 a.m., eating from a bowl of pineapple. That single detail undercut the parents' version. It meant the boy was present in the very hours they swore he was still asleep. That discrepancy has hung over the case ever since. Was French mistaken, confusing the timeline in a hectic morning? Or were John and Patsy deliberately shielding their son, keeping him out of the official story? The pineapple itself became a symbol of fingerprints on the bowl, undigested fruit in JonBenét's stomach, and conflicting stories about who served it. If Burke was at that table, the narrative of a sleeping child collapses. The contradiction between sworn statements and a cop's first-hand observation sharpened suspicions and left one more fracture in an already broken timeline. By 2001, the Ramsey narrative shifted. In their earliest interviews, John and Patsy swore their son had slept soundly through the night, oblivious until officers shook him awake. 4 years later, the story bent. They now admitted Burke had stirred before the 911 call. They said he heard his mother's screams echoing through the halls, his father trying to calm her. He was frightened, they claimed, and tears welled in his eyes. Yet they insisted they believed he drifted back to sleep, still insulated from the crisis unraveling below. That admission created cracks. John began adjusting his memory, sometimes saying Burke woke before the call, sometimes after. Each version conflicted with the last, adding fuel to suspicions that the timeline was not only fragile but managed. The shifting details suggested either memory eroded by trauma or deliberate recalibration as the family's defense strategy evolved. In more recent conversations stretching into 2024 and 2025, John reframed the emphasis. He spoke less about precise moments and more about the motive protecting Burke. He argued their instinct was not deception but survival against a relentless press. The boy had already lost his sister, John said, and exposing him to cameras and headlines would have destroyed him further. Still, that evolution in testimony lingers as a shadow. What began as a claim of unbroken sleep became layered with nuance, hearing screams, shedding tears, but remaining silent in bed. Each adjustment deepened the mystery of where Burke truly was in those critical minutes before police arrived. The 911 call, has always been one of the sharpest fault lines in the case. Patsy's panicked voice fills the official transcript. She reports her daughter missing, pleads for help. Then the line seems to hang open for a few seconds longer. In the late 1990s, enhanced audio technology picked up faint sounds in that trailing silence. Analysts claimed they heard three distinct voices, Patsy crying, John saying, "We're not speaking to you," and a child's voice believed to be Burke asking, "What did you find?" That interpretation cut directly against the Ramsey family's story. John and Patsy had sworn their son was upstairs asleep, unaware of the crisis. If his voice was captured on the tape, it meant he was in the kitchen or very close to the phone at the moment the emergency call was made. It meant he was awake, listening, and possibly involved in the chaotic first moments after JonBenét was discovered missing. The Ramseys denied it. Their attorney argued the tape was corrupted, filled with static and echoes that made words easy to imagine, but impossible to prove. They claimed the supposed child's voice was an auditory illusion. Wishful thinking from investigators convinced the boy had to be part of the story. Yet law enforcement never abandoned the transcription. For detectives, that enhanced snippet was a crack in the facade, evidence that Burke was not sleeping as claimed. The dispute left a permanent rift, science suggesting one truth, the family swearing another, and a mystery forever lodged in the background noise of a desperate phone call. Before sleep, Burke Ramsey's movements and habits remain one of the most heavily dissected aspects of the case. In later years, he admitted he may have crept downstairs after the family returned from the Whites' Christmas party, and everyone had gone to bed. He recalled wanting to work on a toy in the quiet of the night, a memory he described in his 2016 interview with Dr. Phil. This admission cracked the official timeline his parents had given in 1997, that both children went straight to bed and stayed there until morning. It raised the possibility that Burke and JonBenet were awake together in the kitchen. The pineapple evidence sharpened that suspicion. A bowl of fresh pineapple and milk was found on the Ramsey kitchen table, bearing fingerprints from both Patsy and Burke. Nearby was a glass with JonBenét's prints. The coroner's report confirmed pineapple in JonBenét's small intestine, ingested roughly 1 to 2 hours before her death. Yet both John and Patsy denied ever serving her pineapple that night, insisting she would carry it upstairs asleep. Burke himself, when asked in a 1998 interview, said, "I guess it's possible. I don't remember, but maybe." The simplest conclusion drawn by investigators was that Burke had been eating pineapple late at night and that JonBenet joined him. Other elements added further intrigue. Burke was an active member of the Cub Scouts, where he learned practical skills such as using knives, handling flashlights, and tying knots. At the Ramsey home, the crime scene featured a flashlight wiped clean of fingerprints, a garrote fashioned from a broken paintbrush, and complex cord knots around JonBenét's wrists and neck. None of these details linked directly to Burke, but the overlap between his scouting experience and those items fueled speculation. Investigators debated whether these were signs of adult staging, or whether a child could have improvised them with knowledge picked up from scouting activities. Another odd note came from the Whites' Christmas party on December 25, 1996. Burke reportedly received a mild electric shock from the Whites' deer fence. He mentioned this incident in his later police interviews. On its own, it seems trivial. Yet when theories emerged that JonBenet bore marks consistent with a stun gun, some commentators drew a tenuous link. Had the idea that he'd been present in Burke's evening? Did someone in the family repurpose that concept later? Crucially, no hard evidence has ever connected Burke's shock at the party to the disputed stun gun theory, but in a case starved of certainties, small coincidences became magnified. After waking, Burke's behavior added to the mystery. Accounts diverged. His parents first said he slept through the night and knew nothing until police arrived. Yet Officer Rick French reported seeing him awake and eating pineapple at the kitchen table shortly after 6 a.m. later. John and Patsy altered their story, admitting Burke may have heard the screams, been frightened, and even shed tears, though they still claimed they believed he was asleep. The combination of late-night toy building, the pineapple, Cub Scout skills, and the odd electric shock at the Whites' party painted Burke as more active in those hours than the original family narrative allowed. None of it amounts to proof of wrongdoing, but these fragments remain essential to any timeline reconstruction. They suggest that before and after waking, Burke was not the passive, oblivious boy once described, but instead a silent figure moving just outside the spotlight of one of America's most enduring mysteries. Eventually, according to Burke, he did come downstairs. Yet he maintains he never joined in the frantic search for JonBenet. He has denied being present at the 911 call, despite enhanced audio suggesting otherwise. He also strongly rejected theories that placed him at the center of the crime itself. Over the years, he has flatly denied ever striking his sister with a baseball bat or a maglite flashlight, denied stabbing her with toy train tracks, and denied any assault. These allegations raised by investigators, media reports, and later documentaries were, in his words, unfounded and cruel. What strikes many observers is not only what Burke says he didn't do, but how he behaved afterward. Once removed from the home, he was taken to the Whites' residence while police continued their search of the Ramsey house. There, multiple witnesses recalled him sitting quietly and playing Nintendo. The image of a 9-year-old absorbed in a video game while his sister remained undiscovered in the basement shocked the public. To some, it suggested dissociation. To others, it was a coping mechanism, a child retreating to something familiar in the face of incomprehensible loss. The next day, December 27, 1996, Burke sat for a psychological interview with Dr. Suzanne Bernard, arranged privately through the family's legal team rather than law enforcement. By all accounts, his demeanor was calm. He did not cry. He did not appear frightened. While answering questions, he played with toys, gave short and matter-of-fact replies, and volunteered little beyond what was asked. What was most notable was what he did not say. He asked nothing about his sister, where she was, what had happened, or why the house had been filled with police the morning before. Investigators who later reviewed these transcripts described him as emotionally flat. For a boy who had just lost his younger sister under violent and mysterious circumstances, the absence of visible grief or curiosity stood out. Some argued it reflected trauma, shock, or a natural withdrawal. Others saw it as unnatural detachment, a sign that he either knew more than he admitted or had been carefully coached. This emotionally muted response, coupled with his insistence that he stayed in bed out of fear and never became involved in the immediate aftermath, created a stark contrast with the chaos surrounding him. While his parents cried, prayed, and called police, Burke presented the opposite, a child who seemed almost untouched by tragedy. Whether that calmness was innocence, denial, or something darker has remained a point of debate for decades. From the very beginning, investigators noticed that the Ramsey family's recollections of Christmas night were not aligned. John Ramsey initially told police he had read bedtime stories to both of his children before they went to sleep. That detail suggested a routine, a quiet family moment that closed out the holiday. Later, however, his version shifted. He said JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car on the way back from the Whites' party, and that he carried her directly to bed without waking her. This change created uncertainty about whether he truly remembered the sequence of events or whether he was adjusting his memory to fit the official narrative. Patsy's statements carried their own inconsistencies. At one point, she described putting JonBenét to bed in a red outfit. Yet when the girl was found, she was still dressed in the white clothing she had worn to the Christmas dinner the night before. That discrepancy raised questions about whether JonBenét had been changed for bed, or whether she had never been tucked in as claimed. Either possibility pointed to a gap in the timeline that Patsy never satisfactorily resolved. Burke's account added another layer of contradiction. In his 1998 interview, he recalled that JonBenét sometimes slept in his room, and even claimed she had done so on Christmas night. Yet crime scene photographs showed both beds in Burke's room neatly made. The bedding appeared undisturbed, contradicting the idea that two children had shared the room that night. Burke also said that when the weather was especially cold, he would sometimes sleep in his sister's room. Boulder on December 25, 1996, was bitterly cold around 9° F with snow on the ground, conditions that could have made the children's more fluid than the parents later suggested. Physical evidence from the house hinted at late-night activity. 2 empty soda cans were found in the sink of Burke's bathroom, suggesting he had been awake and drinking before or during the night. Another can of Dr. Pepper was discovered in the basement train room. Investigators speculated that these details could indicate children moving around the house after bedtime, possibly sharing snacks or drinks. Some theorized that the soda, combined with Burke's history of bedwetting, might have played into the night's events, either as a trigger for conflict or as part of the evidence of his wakefulness. Taken together, the contradictions created a fractured picture. John's shifting description of bedtime, Patsy's confusion about JonBenét's clothing, Burke's inconsistent statements about sleeping arrangements, and the physical traces of soda cans all painted a story that was far from seamless. Each family member seemed to carry a slightly different version of the night, with small but significant details that clashed. For investigators, these inconsistencies made it difficult to lock down a reliable timeline. More importantly, they suggested that either memory had failed in the aftermath of trauma, or that elements of the truth were deliberately being concealed to shield someone inside the house. The contradictions remain among the most scrutinized aspects of the Ramsey case, feeding the enduring suspicion that the family's story has never been fully told. among the many details that investigators, journalists, and authors have revisited over the decades. Burke Ramsey's long-term behavioral history stands out because it appears to intersect with questions of jealousy, emotional regulation, and family dynamics. Two recurring issues often mentioned are bedwetting and alleged scatological behavior. According to Linda Wilcox, one of the Ramsey housekeepers, Burke continued wetting the bed until around age 6. Wilcox claimed that the problem seemed to resolve when Patsy's attention shifted heavily toward JonBenét, who was beginning her child beauty pageant career. In Wilcox's recollection, the timing was striking as Burke's bedwetting diminished. JonBenét reportedly developed the same issue, becoming a chronic bedwetter herself. For some analysts, this suggested a psychological pattern in which the children's urinary problems were connected to stress, parental focus, and family pressure. The FBI has long considered persistent bedwetting beyond early childhood as a possible indicator of emotional strain, though not determinative of violence. The second theme, scatological behavior, remains more controversial. Linda Hoffman-Plew, another housekeeper, told police she had discovered feces smeared on JonBenét's belongings, including once on a box of candy. She also recalled an incident in which Burke allegedly smeared feces on the walls of JonBenét's bedroom. Such claims, while sensational, were never confirmed by the Ramsey family or their pediatrician Dr. Francesco Buff. Still, they took on weight when investigators later reported finding feces on a box of JonBenét's Christmas candy during the crime scene search. Forensic testing was inconclusive, and no official link to Burke was ever established, but the anecdotal overlap kept the suspicion alive. These reports fueled theories about sibling rivalry and underlying hostility. To some experts, behaviors like bedwetting and scatological incidents reflected unresolved tension and frustration, possibly tied to the attention lavished on JonBenét. Critics countered that such behaviors are not uncommon in children, especially under stress, and should not be conflated with violent tendencies. They argued that the Ramseys' household was already a high-pressure environment between Patsy's perfectionism, John's demanding business career, and the constant glare of public life through pageants, leaving both children vulnerable to acting out in unusual ways. Nevertheless, in the court of public opinion, these details carried a dark undertone. The idea of a brother smearing feces on his sister's things resonated as a symbol of resentment, and when combined with the autopsy's revelations and the fractured family timeline, it seemed to many like a piece of a larger puzzle. For investigators, though, the lack of medical or psychological documentation limited the weight of these claims. Dr. Buff never substantiated the allegations, and no records confirmed ongoing behavioral problems beyond what housekeepers had described. In the end, Burke's long-term behaviors remained part of the case's shadowy profile, half anecdote, half speculation. Bedwetting through age 6, a sudden cessation when attention shifted, and unverified claims of scatological habits created a narrative that some believed pointed toward emotional disturbance. Others saw nothing more than ordinary childhood struggles magnified by tragedy. Without definitive proof, these accounts linger not as evidence, but as enduring fragments of suspicion orbiting the Ramsey family mystery. When analyzing the statements Burke Ramsey gave across multiple years, investigators and commentators often return to the question, was he telling the truth? Or was he protecting himself, perhaps subconsciously, by downplaying his role in the last hours of JonBenét's life? The possibility that Burke was lying has been one of the central controversies surrounding the case. Because if he was less than forthcoming, his parents' alleged cover-up becomes easier to understand. The most enduring theory involving Burke is not that he was a cold-blooded killer, but that he accidentally struck JonBenét during a sibling conflict. The flashlight found on the kitchen counter, wiped of fingerprints, matched the dimensions of the skull fracture she suffered. The theory suggests Burke, irritated or provoked possibly during a late-night pineapple snack, hit his sister in a burst of anger. The injury was severe, but not instantly fatal. Faced with the horror of their son's potential responsibility, John and Patsy supposedly staged the crime scene to protect him, writing the ransom note and creating the illusion of a kidnapping. If this scenario is correct, Burke had every reason to obscure his memory of that night. Admitting to being awake, eating pineapple, or arguing with his sister would open the door to the most incriminating interpretation. Thus, when pressed, he relied on vague phrasing, "I guess it's possible," or "I think I might have," instead of clear admissions. This hedging languid him to avoid outright lies while still distancing himself from critical evidence. One of the clearest examples is the pineapple. Forensic testing confirmed JonBenét had pineapple in her digestive system, consumed within hours of her death. The bowl left on the Ramsey kitchen bowl contained both Burke's fingerprints and Patsy's. Yet the parents denied ever serving it that night, and Burke himself said only, "Maybe I had some, I don't remember." The vagueness is telling. A child typically remembers a midnight snack, particularly on Christmas night, but Burke's refusal to give a firm answer suggests a conscious or subconscious effort to obscure. To investigators, it looked like a small but significant lie, a way of protecting himself from admitting he was awake and interacting with JonBené during the crucial window of time. In Burke's 1998 interview with Detective Dan Schuler, another detail caught attention. During a long session, Schuler accidentally drank from Burke's soda. The boy's reaction was immediate. He refused to touch the soda again. This small incident has been interpreted by some as a window into Burke's temperament, jealous, possessive, or insecure about things being taken from him. In the context of his relationship with JonBené, such traits could escalate small conflicts, especially late at night when children are tired and easily irritated. This, combined with anecdotes from housekeepers about jealousy over Christmas gifts, painted a picture of a boy who struggled with sharing attention, affection, or possessions. If the fatal blow truly came out of a trivial argument over toys, pineapple, or parental attention, his overreaction to Schuler's simple mistake seems, at least symbolically, to align with that theory. Another piece of evidence fueling suspicion is the high-tech boot print found in the wine cellar near JonBenét's body. The Ramsey family denied owning such shoes, yet reports surfaced that Burke had in fact been given a pair. While the shoe print has never been definitively linked to him, the discrepancy between denial and possibility again raises the specter of lying. If the family claimed not to own the shoes, yet Burke did, it represents another gap in truth that could suggest conscious concealment. Another piece of evidence fueling suspicion is the high-tech boot print found in the wine cellar near JonBenét's body. The Ramsey family denied owning such shoes, yet reports surfaced that Burke had in fact been given a pair. While the shoe print has never been definitively linked to him, the discrepancy between denial and possibility again raises the specter of lying. If the family claimed not to own the shoes, yet Burke did, it represents another gap in truth that could suggest conscious concealment. The family's testimonies about when Burke woke up also shifted over time. Initially, John and Patsy insisted he was asleep the entire night. Later, they conceded he might have woken during the commotion, hearing Patsy scream and John trying to calm her. Burke himself, years later, said he came downstairs at one point to assemble a toy. These evolving statements raise the possibility that Burke and his parents were corroborating their story as new evidence emerged. The inconsistency is critical. If Burke truly was awake and in the kitchen, it places him much closer to the key events than the parents wanted the public or investigators to believe. Every revision in their accounts looks less like the natural fog of memory and more like a carefully constructed attempt to shield him. Another minor but telling contradiction involves Christmas gifts. Early reports suggested JonBené had received a bicycle for Christmas while Burke did not. For many, this detail became a symbol of jealousy, one child receiving the spotlight while the other was left out. Later, Burke himself claimed he had also received a bicycle, and in a recent interview John confirmed both children had. But during the police interviews in 1997, the parents seemed to imply only JonBené had a bike and Burke would get one for his upcoming birthday. The confusion may stem from simple miscommunication, but in the larger narrative it adds weight to the theme of rivalry. A boy who felt overshadowed by his sister's gifts, beauty pageants, and parental attention may have carried resentment that surfaced in volatile moments. If he lied about whether or not he had a bike, or if his parents muscled investigators to soften the image of sibling jealousy, it again reveals a willingness to bend the truth. No single piece of evidence proves Burke lied. Each item, the pineapple, the soda incident, the high-tech shoe print, the bicycle contradiction could be explained away individually. But taken together, they form a pattern, a child giving vague, inconsistent answers, parents adjusting their stories, and physical evidence pointing toward late-night activity between the siblings. Even the way Burke smiled through his Dr. Phil interview in 2016, explaining it as a nervous habit, reinforced suspicions. His detachment, lack of visible grief, and his careful phrasing left many with the impression that he was still concealing something 2 decades later. The possibility of Burke lying cannot be separated from the larger theory that his parents staged a cover-up. If he accidentally struck his sister, the entire family had reason to close ranks, minimizing his involvement and rewriting the timeline. Burke's ambiguous language, shifting family statements, and behavioral history do not amount to proof, but they cast long shadows of doubt. Whether his lies were deliberate, coached, or the natural gaps of childhood memory, they remain central to why suspicion continues to orbit around him. In the absence of definitive evidence, Burke's truthfulness remains one of the case's most haunting uncertainties. Was he simply a nervous boy, fumbling through interviews? Or was he hiding, with the help of his parents, the secret of what really happened on Christmas night? Until that question is resolved, the possibility of deceit will remain a permanent part of the JonBenéт Ramsey mystery. At the heart of this theory lies motive. Burke was only 9 years old at the time of his sister's death. If Burke had been responsible, even accidentally, John faced a devastating choice: allow his son to be interrogated and potentially charged, or shield him at any cost. John, a wealthy businessman with resources, connections, and a protective instinct, would naturally choose the latter. Preserving the image of a perfect family, maintaining his business reputation, and avoiding the unthinkable stigma of having one child kill another would have been overwhelming pressures. This context explains why John might have shaped, softened, or even fabricated aspects of his testimony. If lies were told, they were not random. They served a clear protective function. One of the most telling inconsistencies involves when Burke awoke on the morning of December 26th. In initial 1997 statements, both John and Patsy insisted Burke had slept through the entire night and morning, oblivious to the chaos until police were already inside the house. This account insulated Burke, ensuring he could not be questioned as a direct witness. But later, John altered his version. By 2001, he acknowledged that Burke may have been awake earlier, perhaps hearing his mother scream or his father attempting to calm her. In still later interviews, John seemed to vacillate, sometimes suggesting Burke woke after the 9/11 call, other times implying he stirred before. This shifting testimony undermined his credibility. If Burke's exact movements that morning were so unclear, why did John not clarify them sooner? To critics, the answer was simple: because telling the truth might have placed Burke closer to the crime. John also gave conflicting impressions about the order in which JonBenét was killed. At points he implied she was strangled first, then struck in the head. The autopsy, however, made clear the opposite. The head blow came first, causing a catastrophic brain injury, and strangulation followed, possibly as staging. By reversing the sequence, John may have been minimizing the possibility of an impulsive, accidental blow from a family member, framing the event instead as the deliberate act of an outside killer. On December 26th, it was John who found JonBenét's body in the basement. His description of that discovery contained troubling elements. He claimed her wrists were tightly bound, but the autopsy showed the bindings were loose, with room for movement. Such exaggeration painted a picture of a sadistic intruder rather than a clumsy cover-up. Even more controversial was the basement window. John told investigators the window had been broken previously, and he may have even used it to enter the house months earlier when locked out. But the story shifted. Sometimes it was broken by him, sometimes he was unsure when, sometimes it might have been broken by an intruder. This uncertainty fueled theories that John was deliberately blurring details to leave open the possibility of forced entry. Another small but telling discrepancy concerned federal investigators. John once insisted the FBI had not been present in the case's early stages. Records, however, showed otherwise. Agents had indeed been involved. Why deny this? Perhaps it was an innocent lapse, but critics argue it fit a larger pattern of minimizing scrutiny, particularly from agencies beyond Boulder's flawed police force. Christmas gifts also provided fertile ground for contradictions. Early on, John suggested that only JonBenét received a bicycle that year, while Burke would get his later for his birthday. This narrative seemed to reinforce Burke's status as the overlooked sibling, potentially explaining jealousy. Yet in later years, including theirs around 2024, John admitted both children had received bicycles. The inconsistency is minor in isolation, but in the broader context it illustrates John's willingness to adjust details over time. Perhaps the most tangible piece of physical evidence was the high-tech boot print found in the basement near JonBenét's body. The family denied owning any high-tech footwear, but reports suggested Burke may have had a pair. John maintained his denials, refusing to acknowledge the possibility. For skeptics, this looked like another cover, keeping attention away from a clue that could tie his son to the scene. In his more recent interviews, including those given in 2024 and 2025, John has repeatedly emphasized the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. He insists this evidence excludes all family members and proves an intruder was responsible. While technically true, this stance avoids a deeper problem. The DNA is touch level and could be contamination from manufacturing or secondary transfer. By leaning heavily on it, John deflects attention from inconsistencies in his own statements and the troubling behavioral evidence about Burke. He has never encouraged investigators to re-examine his son's movements that night, nor has he admitted the possibility of late-night sibling interaction. His focus remains on the intruder theory, even as decades of inquiry have failed to identify such a suspect. In his more recent interviews, including those given in 2024 and 2025, John has repeatedly emphasized the unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing. He insists this evidence excludes all family members and proves an intruder was responsible. While technically true, this stance avoids a deeper problem. The DNA is touch level and could be contamination from manufacturing or secondary transfer. By leaning heavily on it, John deflects attention from inconsistencies in his own statements and the troubling behavioral evidence about Burke. He has never encouraged investigators to re-examine his son's movements that night, nor has he admitted the possibility of late-night sibling interaction. His focus remains on the intruder theory, even as decades of inquiry have failed to identify such a suspect. John's demeanor has also been scrutinized. He often appeared calm, controlled, even detached in media interviews. Some saw this as stoics, others viewed it as calculated image management. When contrasted with Patsy's emotional outbursts, John's composure seemed like a deliberate effort to guide the narrative. By maintaining consistency around the idea of an intruder, even while altering smaller details, he projected confidence, hoping to steer investigators and the public toward a theory that cleared his family. Taken together, these examples reveal a pattern. John repeatedly adjusted his story: when Burke woke up, how JonBené died, whether the window was broken, who received bicycles, and whether federal agents were involved. Each shift, when isolated, might be explained as faulty memory under trauma, but the cumulative effect suggests deliberate shaping of the truth. The lies, if they were lies, were never wild or reckless. They were precise, aimed at minimizing suspicion of Burke and reinforcing the idea of an outside intruder. The possibility that John Ramsey lied does not automatically prove his direct involvement in JonBenét's death. But it does raise the likelihood that he participated in protecting someone else, most plausibly his son. By changing testimony, exaggerating details, and denying inconvenient facts, John may have constructed a protective shield around his family. The cost of that protection has been decades of suspicion, unanswered questions, and a case that remains unsolved. Ultimately, John's lies, if they were lies, may not have been about concealing murder, but about concealing a tragic accident. Yet in the eyes of the public, deception in the aftermath of such a crime is almost indistinguishable from guilt itself. And that ambiguity ensures John's credibility will forever be entangled with the unresolved fate of his daughter. One of the most disputed aspects of Burke Ramsey's testimony is his description of what, if anything, happened between him and his sister on Christmas night. Investigators have long suspected that he lied about, or at least concealed the true nature of their interactions. The reason is straightforward: admitting to late-night contact with JonBené could place him at the center of the fatal chain of events. The strongest piece of evidence comes from the pineapple bowl discovered on the Ramsey kitchen table. The serving contained Burke's fingerprints, and JonBené had pineapple in her digestive tract, consumed within hours of death. Yet Burke consistently denied remembering eating pineapple with her. His phrasing, "I guess it's possible," was deliberately vague, a way of avoiding outright contradiction while still distancing himself from the evidence. This hedging suggests he may have been present at the snack, but did not want to admit it. For investigators, this was a potential moment of truth. The children awakened together, sharing food, when a dispute may have erupted. Burke also denied any involvement with the possible weapons. The Maglite flashlight found on the counter was wiped clean of fingerprints and matched the dimensions of JonBenét's head wound. A piece of her toy train track was also considered as a possible blunt object. Burke, a Cub Scout familiar with tools, knives, and flashlights, fit the profile of someone who could have handled such items. Yet he categorically dismissed the notion. By removing himself from all possible connections to these objects, he attempted to eliminate suspicion, but the very neatness of his denials made investigators skeptical. Underlying all of this was the family's history of jealousy and sibling conflict. In 1995, Burke had struck JonBené with a golf club while playing indoors. The blow required surgery, though it was deemed an accident. Still, the incident revealed that physical aggression between the siblings was not impossible. Housekeepers also recalled Burke sulking when JonBené received more Christmas gifts or more attention from Patsy. These anecdotes reinforced the plausibility of a quarrel escalating into violence. If Burke admitted to eating pineapple with JonBené, it would confirm he was awake and near her shortly before the fatal injury. If he admitted handling the flashlight or train tracks, it would open the door to an accident theory. Instead, he denied all of it, painting himself as a boy asleep in his room. This narrative was convenient, but contradicted by fingerprints, food evidence, and even his own later admission that he sometimes snuck downstairs to play with toys after bedtime. In short, Burke's testimony about his interaction with JonBené is riddled with evasions. He downplayed shared activities, denied touching key objects, and ignored past incidents that revealed jealousy and aggression. To investigators, these were not innocent lapses of memory but deliberate efforts to distance himself from the truth. Whether coached by his parents or acting out of his own fear, Burke seemed intent on erasing any link between himself, the pineapple, and the potential weapons. And in doing so, he left behind a record of contradictions that continues to fuel suspicion decades later. From the very beginning of the investigation, one of the most contested issues has been Burke Ramsey's account of when he woke up on the morning of December 26, 1996. His parents originally told police he slept through the entire night and did not stir until long after the 9/11 call. This picture kept him removed from the crime itself and insulated him from suspicion. But over time, cracks began to show. Enhanced analysis of the 9/11 tape suggested a child's voice, likely Burke, was audible in the background, asking, "What did you find?" That detail directly contradicted the family's story. When questioned in interviews, Burke often used vague, non-committal language about waking up. Phrases like "I think," "maybe," and "I don't remember" were sprinkled throughout his statements. Such hedging made it impossible to pin down his exact timeline. This lack of clarity did not resemble ordinary childish forgetfulness. Rather, it looked like an intentional strategy to avoid incriminating detail, acknowledging just enough possibility to leave wiggle room, while never admitting to being awake when JonBené was attacked. Adding to this suspicion were inconsistencies between his version and other witnesses. Officer Rick French reported seeing Burke awake and sitting at the kitchen table eating pineapple when he arrived around 6 a.m. That observation clashed sharply with the family's insistence that Burke was still in bed. Detectives later noted that when Burke was finally interviewed, he seemed peculiarly detached, even flat. He showed no curiosity about what had happened to his sister and no emotional response to her death. Some psychologists interpreted this as avoidance and emotional distancing that may have been reinforced by the lies he told about his wakefulness. Burke's denials also extended to his personal behaviors. Housekeepers had previously described him as a bedwetter into his later childhood, and there were unconfirmed reports of scatological incidents of feces smeared on JonBenét's belongings. Burke never admitted to such behaviors, and his parents downplayed or ignored them. Yet these details mattered because they hinted at stress, sibling rivalry, and unresolved psychological struggles. Admitting to them would have opened the door for investigators to connect his behavioral issues to the night's events. Denial was safer. What emerges is a picture of deliberate minimization. Burke likely woke earlier than he claimed, possibly during or just after the incident, and chose to obscure that fact with vague wording. He shielded not only his role in the timeline but also deeper issues that might have cast him as troubled or jealous. Whether coached by his parents or instinctively self-protective, he crafted an image of himself as the quiet boy asleep upstairs, untouched by the chaos below. In reality, the evidence suggests otherwise. Fingerprints on the pineapple bowl, the disputed 9/11 background audio, and eyewitness accounts all imply was awake and moving around. By denying or muddying these facts, Burke reinforced suspicion. His lies about waking up may not prove guilt, but they reveal a pattern. When faced with details that could connect him to the crime, Burke consistently chose evasion over truth. When analyzing Burke Ramsey's shifting statements and evasions, one must ask, what was the ultimate goal? The most convincing explanation is that Burke's denials were designed to shield him from two powerful threats: legal accountability and the relentless judgment of public opinion. At just 9 years old, Burke was old enough to face suspicion, but too young to defend himself. Any admission of late-night activity with JonBené, of anger or aggression, or even of being awake during the critical hours, could have opened him up to lifelong stigma or worse, criminal liability under the glare of a national spotlight. By maintaining that he was asleep through the night, Burke preserved the image of an innocent bystander, a child blindsided by tragedy. This narrative not only protected him legally but also framed him as a secondary victim, one who lost a sister and then suffered through years of suspicion and media scrutiny. To confess to being awake, to eating pineapple with JonBené, or to witnessing chaos would have shattered that carefully constructed image and invited devastating questions. The 2016 Dr. Phil interview exemplifies this tension. Nearly 20 years after the crime, Burke finally agreed to speak publicly. Viewers were struck by his demeanor. He smiled, sometimes even laughed, while recounting the morning his sister was found dead. To many, this came across as bizarre, even chilling. Some saw it as a subconscious leakage of guilt, a way of masking darker knowledge. Others interpreted it as a defense mechanism for laughter under stress, a way of compartmentalizing trauma. Psychologists often note that children exposed to extreme stress sometimes develop inappropriate affect, where emotional expression doesn't match the situation. Burke's behavior fit that pattern. But whether it was guilt or trauma, the effect was the same. His smile unsettled the public and reignited debates about his role in the case. Critics argued that no innocent brother could laugh when describing his mother screaming and his father rushing around in panic. Supporters countered that he had lived 2 decades under suspicion, and the smile was simply the nervous tick of a man cornered once again by the past. Still, the fact remains, Burke's consistent purpose has been to avoid any statement that might implicate him. He downplayed his own memories, denied interacting with JonBené that night, and rejected connections to evidence such as the flashlight or pineapple. He portrayed himself as absent, detached, and uninvolved. Whether guided by his parents' coaching or his own instincts, this strategy kept him legally untouched, even as speculation raged. In the end, Burke's purpose can be understood as survival. Survival from the justice system, which might have interpreted an accident as something more sinister. Survival from the media, which was eager to crown a villain in a story already filled with tragedy. And survival of his own self-image. The boy who wasn't the killer, but the brother who had to live forever with the shadow of suspicion. By denying, by smiling through the chaos, Burke clung to that fragile identity even as the world kept doubting it. The strongest suspicion surrounding John Ramsey is not that he killed his daughter, but that he deliberately lied about his son's role and condition in the hours surrounding the crime. From the beginning, John and Patsy maintained that Burke had been asleep the entire night and morning of December 26, 1996. According to their first police statements, Burke never stirred, never heard his mother's screams, and only woke once law enforcement was already present in the house. This version neatly separated him from any possibility of involvement, but cracks appeared quickly. Enhanced audio of Patsy's 911 call suggested a child's voice, likely Burke asking, "What did you find?" after Patsy thought she had hung up. If this interpretation was correct, it proved Burke had been awake during the initial chaos, directly contradicting his parents' narrative. As pressure mounted, John's position shifted. By the early 2000s, he admitted Burke might have been awake, possibly overhearing Patsy's screams and his father's attempts to calm her. Yet this adjustment never went further. John conceded just enough to align with new evidence, but still withheld detail that could place Burke closer to the crime. Equally troubling was John's silence about Burke's behavior after JonBenét's was found. Police logs and witness accounts indicate Burke was taken to the White family's house, where he quietly played video games while investigators combed through his home. To many, this detachment seemed abnormal. A 9-year-old whose sister had just been murdered showed no visible grief, no curiosity, no fear, however, consistently downplayed or ignored this. In interviews, he presented Burke as traumatized, too overwhelmed to process events. By concealing or reframing his son's flat effect, John shielded him from public suspicion. The lies or evasions extended to details that could reveal behavioral issues. Reports of bedwetting, temper outbursts, or scatological incidents were brushed aside by the family. John never acknowledged them, even when they surfaced in housekeeper testimony or investigative files. To admit them would have painted Burke as troubled and unstable, fueling the theory that sibling rivalry or impulsive aggression had triggered tragedy. By suppressing these narratives, John maintained the portrait of Burke as innocent and uninvolved. In essence, John's lies were protective lies. They sought to create distance between his son and the crime. At first, Burke was the boy asleep upstairs, unreachable and untouched. When evidence threatened that story, John carefully revised it. Yes, Burke may have been awake, but only as a frightened child hiding in his room. When questions arose about Burke's lack of emotion, John framed it as trauma. At every turn, the objective was the same: keep Burke out of the spotlight, keep him away from police interrogation, and keep the family narrative intact. If John lied, it was not a random deception. It was a deliberate, consistent strategy to protect his only surviving child. By shaping Burke's image first as sleeping, later as frightened but passive, John fought to preserve innocence, even if it meant concealing truths that might have explained what really happened that Christmas night. When examining John Ramsey's pattern of statements, denials, and shifting narratives, a clear purpose emerges: to shield his son Burke from suspicion, preserve the family's image of innocence, and keep investigators focused on the idea of an external intruder. Every inconsistency, every omission appears to serve that larger strategy of protection. From the earliest days, John and Patsy insisted that Burke had the night of December 26, 1996. This effectively placed him outside the timeline of the crime. Even as audio experts suggested Burke's voice could be heard on the 9/11 tape, John resisted acknowledging it. Only years later did he cautiously revise his account to allow for the possibility that Burke had woken. But even then he minimized it, framing his son as a frightened child who stayed in his room. This gradual adjustment suggests John's intent was never full disclosure, it was damage control, making small concessions while shielding Burke from deeper scrutiny. John's protective strategy extended beyond statements. When police requested a polygraph test for Burke in the months after the murder, the family refused. They cited his age and emotional state, but critics saw something else: fear that Burke's answers might expose contradictions. Similarly, John and Patsy insisted that Burke's interviews be conducted through child psychologists and carefully monitored. Detectives were never given the freedom to directly press him in an unfiltered interrogation. This control over access ensured that Burke's words remained within a narrow, curated narrative, John also took decisive action to remove Burke from the media spotlight. Within days of JonBenét's funeral, Burke was moved out of Boulder and enrolled in a new school under conditions of secrecy. The stated reason was to protect a grieving child from overwhelming publicity. But it also conveniently ensured that reporters, neighbors, and even classmates could not observe his demeanor or question him. The boy who might have held answers was kept invisible, shielded from both investigation and public speculation. Legal maneuvers reinforced this protective wall. When Star magazine in 1999 and CB616 publicly advanced the brother did it theory, John and Patsy pursued aggressive lawsuits. Though presented as battles for reputation, these cases had the practical effect of silencing accusations against Burke. By forcing retractions and securing settlements, John helped control the narrative, discouraging other outlets from naming his son as a suspect. The underlying purpose of all these actions was not only to defend Burke, but to preserve the family's broader claim of innocence. By maintaining a united front and intruder broke in, we were all victims. John deflected attention outward. This narrative aligned with his public appeals for justice and his insistence that investigators had failed. In sum, John's lies and evasions were not random. They formed a strategy aimed at protecting his surviving child from suspicion, keeping the family untarnished in the public eye, and redirecting the case toward an external perpetrator. Whether motivated by paternal love, fear of legal consequences, or both, John's every move suggested a single overriding purpose: to ensure that Burke would never become the center of the investigation. When viewed across decades, the Ramseys' actions appear less like spontaneous grief and more like deliberate calculation, carefully designed to protect their son Burke and preserve the family's public image. Central to this strategy was the staging of the crime scene. The ransom note, demanding an oddly precise sum of $118,000, the exact amount of John's recent bonus, was written on paper from inside the Ramsey home. Handwriting analysis later suggested significant similarities with Patsy's style, though never conclusively enough for prosecution. To many, this note looked less like the work of a foreign kidnapper and more like a hasty attempt to redirect investigators' focus away from the family itself. John and Patsy's statements also shifted in telling ways. In the earliest days, they insisted Burke had slept through the entire night. But once audio experts enhanced the 911 call and claimed a child's voice could be heard in the background, John subtly adjusted the family's version. By 2001, he acknowledged Burke may have woken briefly, hearing his mother scream and his father urging calm. This incremental change did not expose Burke, but it insulated the parents from accusations of lying outright. John led this revision, carefully managing the family's narrative in public interviews. Even 2 decades later, the protective posture never softened. At CrimeCon appearances in 2024 and in a Netflix docuseries released around the same time, John once again dismissed the theory that Burke had any involvement. He stressed the significance of unidentified male DNA found on JonBenét's clothing, repeating his long-standing claim that the evidence pointed to an outsider. Yet critics noted that this emphasis on DNA sidestepped the inconsistencies in the family's timeline and the unusual circumstances surrounding the ransom note and crime scene staging. The legal front reinforced this broader campaign of control. In 1999, the Ramseys filed a $25 million lawsuit against Star magazine. Burke was the killer. The case ended in a private settlement, but the damage control was clear. Public accusations of brother did it BDI would be met with aggressive legal force. The same strategy reappeared in 2016 when CBS aired this of JonBenét Ramsey and suggested Burke struck his sister in a late-night altercation. Burke responded with a $750 million defamation suit, which was settled confidentially in 2019. Again, the settlement silenced the narrative without forcing the family to admit fault. Together, these actions paint a consistent picture. The Ramseys calculated every move, staging the ransom note to push the intruder theory, altering their statements to match emerging evidence, and weaponizing lawsuits to suppress the BDI theory in the press. Even as late as 25, John maintained this posture, repeating the same outward-facing message while denying any family role. To many observers, this persistence underscores what the Ramseys' strategy has always been: not to solve the mystery of JonBenét's death, but to protect Burke at all costs and keep the family shielded from legal and social ruin. When looking at Burke Ramsey's place in the JonBenét case, it is important to distinguish between intent and influence. At 9 years old, he was far too young to mastermind a cover-up, draft a ransom note, or coordinate a story under interrogation. Yet that does not eliminate the possibility that he played some small part in concealing the truth consciously or unconsciously under the guidance of his parents. His vague statements, emotional flatness, and occasional contradictions suggest not the hand of a schemer, but the pliability of a child coached and protected by adults who understood far better what was at stake. From the start, Burke's words revealed uncertainty. In interviews with psychologists and detectives, he often defaulted to phrases like "I think," "maybe," or "I don't remember." Such language could reflect trauma, but it could also be the careful ambiguity of a child told not to give away too much. When asked about eating pineapple, a critical detail tying him to the last known moments of JonBenét's life, he said, "Maybe I had some." That hesitant answer preserved doubt, neither confirming nor denying, leaving open space that conveniently protected him from direct implication. His behavior after the crime also raised eyebrows. While his sister's body was being searched for and later discovered, Burke reportedly played video games at a friend's house, calm and detached. To investigators, this seemed unnatural. But viewed another way, it was the compliance of a child following parental instruction: stay out of sight, do not ask questions, act as if nothing happened. His emotional flatness, no tears, no curiosity, no fear, fit the profile of a boy buffered from reality by the protective wall his parents built around him. Family actions reinforced this interpretation. John and Patsy kept Burke away from police interviews for almost 2 weeks, insisted on controlled sessions with child psychologists, and refused a polygraph. They moved him out of Boulder soon after the funeral from cameras, and later pursued lawsuits against any media outlet that alleged his involvement. Through these actions, they not only protected him from scrutiny but also shaped his role in the story, a background figure, passive, unreachable, and ultimately voiceless except in curated appearances. In this light, Burke's potential participation in the cover-up looks less like conscious collusion and more like a child playing along with the narrative his parents provided. He may have known more than he admitted, perhaps remembered moments of conflict or noise that night, but under pressure, he offered only fragments enough to avoid contradicting the family, never enough to expose them. His vague testimony, paired with a strangely calm demeanor, may reflect precisely what John and Patsy wanted: a son who could neither confirm nor deny, who seemed too young, too quiet, too innocent to suspect. Thus, Burke's role in any cover-up was not that of a mastermind but of a child protected and directed. His statement carried the fingerprints of adult influence, his silence the echo of parental coaching. If he helped hide the truth, it was by omission, not orchestration, a boy guided to forget, to stay quiet, and to let his parents bear the burden of constructing the larger lie. When every detail of the JonBenét Ramsey case is placed under a microscope, the overarching goal of John and Patsy becomes clear: to transform what may have been a tragic family accident into the appearance of a mysterious outside abduction. By shifting suspicion outward, they not only protected their surviving son Burke from prosecution, but also insulated themselves from scandal, public disgrace, and the possibility of prison. The elements of this transformation are visible in the evidence. The ransom note, written on Patsy's stationery, demanded $18,000, eerily close to John's recent bonus. Its language was overly elaborate, more like a script than a kidnapper's message, and handwriting analysis pointed toward Patsy, though never definitively. Rather than being proof of an intruder, it looked to many investigators like part of a deliberate staging. The basement window, which John later emphasized as a possible point of entry, was another cornerstone of the narrative, though physical evidence around the sill suggested no one had climbed through. At the same time, internal contradictions within the family's statements raised questions about sincerity. John initially said he read to both children before bed, but later claimed JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car. Patsy described her daughter wearing red pajamas, though the body was found in the white outfit from the dinner party. Burke's own words were filled with maybes, and "I don't remember," language that conveniently avoided clarity. These inconsistencies reinforced the suspicion that the family had coordinated their testimony to support a broader cover story. John Ramsey's long-standing emphasis on DNA evidence reflects another layer of this strategy. By 2025, he continued to highlight the unidentifiable DNA found on JonBenét's clothing as proof that no family member could be responsible. This argument has been effective in media appearances, including CrimeCon and recent docuseries, where he framed the DNA as exculpatory. Yet critics note that touch DNA can be transferred indirectly, and its mere presence does not exclude family involvement. The persistence of behavioral contradictions, Burke's flat effect, Patsy's suspicious handwriting, John's shifting accounts ensures that the brother did it theory continues to live on, despite the DNA narrative. The legal battles further reveal the purpose behind the cover-up. Lawsuits against Star Magazine in 1999 and CBS in 2016 were not just about defamation, they were strategic maneuvers to silence media outlets from amplifying the BDI theory. Both suits ended in private settlements, allowing the family to claim vindication without publicly addressing the uncomfortable evidence. This legal aggression discouraged others from pursuing the same angle, effectively narrowing the conversation in ways that protected Burke. As of 2025, the case remains officially unsolved. Boulder police have stated they hope to apply advanced genetic genealogy techniques to the unidentified DNA, similar to methods that cracked other cold cases. Whether this will bring clarity remains uncertain. What is clear is that the Ramseys' overarching objective of reframing the incident as an outside intrusion has succeeded in keeping their family out of court for nearly 3 decades. Yet the persistence of conflicting behaviors and unresolved questions ensures that suspicion never fully disappears, leaving the public caught between forensic science and psychological doubt.